For this podcast, I want to touch upon the area of mental health in young people and perhaps social media, because statistics show that mental health is rising in young people, and I don't quite know why this is. So, Amy, have you any theories on this?
I personally think it's more to do with technology and social media. I think, obviously, you compare yourself a lot to other people on social media, and also constantly being connected to people, you feel sort of anxious when you're not, because it doesn't feel normal not to be speaking to someone all the time. So, like, if you're in a relationship, it's quite difficult and you have anxiety because you're used to knowing like what they're doing, where they are. So like when you don't hear from them, it's really anxiety inducing. Like, I need to know that somebody's safe all the time. I need to know where they're going, like, and when they're going to get back, and if they're safe. And they mistake that a lot for like being controlling, but really it's just because it puts my mind at ease if I know. It's not like I'm tracking them. It's just like if there's a emergency, then I know where they are and if I can get to them.
Well, years ago, kids were, let out and they went off to play and they'd come back and then, they'd smell the food, or they'd know food was, and their stomach was rumbling and they were coming home for that. And there was a lot less anxiety about letting your kids out. So for some reason that has increased and increased. But what you're raising as well is because everybody you can track them. You know what they're doing. I find that really strange. If I was to worry about people wherever they go at all times, I wouldn't have a life myself.
No, but it's difficult because I'm used to like having grown up with technology most of my life. Like since I was about, I think 13, I had a phone. And obviously at that age I didn't really text very much, but like the older I got, the better phones got, and then the more people were speaking all the time, and then you got social media on your phone and you're just so used to it. Like you can get it out your pocket and go on it 24/7. When I was a kid, I was still quite nervous, but not as anxious as I am now. Like I was quite sensitive when I was a child, but I wasn't how I am, like anxiety wise. I get nervous for no reason now.
So where do you think this kind of nervousness came about or got worse?
When I was 16, I was I wouldn't say stalked, but I was followed to college a few times by the same man. And it wasn't just following, it was like running. That was the first time. Basically, me and my friend were walking to college and we were just talking normally, and then I turned around to cross the road, like I had looked behind me, and there was a guy stood right behind us and he gave us this like really weird look, like he looked sort of menacing. So we crossed the road and he crossed as well. So we kept crossing, and every time we crossed he would cross. So we started walking faster and then he started walking really fast. So I said we need to go over to this bus stop because it's like full of people. So we did that, and then he sort of ran down a side road. So after that, we went to college and we spoke to like this counsellor who said that we seemed like we're really anxious, especially me, because I'm quite sensitive. So like I was already anxious anyway. So that just made it like 10 times worse. And then we got the police involved, but they didn't really do much. They just sort of gave me a rape alarm and said, if it happens again, call us again. And it did happen again. He was a bit further back this time, but like we could still see him, and we didn't like walking to college. So we started to get lifts in the morning, and I rang the police again, and they decided to follow me to college. The first time they were dressed in uniform, and the guy obviously must have seen them and didn't turn up. And then the second time they were dressed normally, but obviously he'd seen them already, so he didn't turn up again. But then I think it was like a week or two later, we decided to get the bus again because we sort of braved it. We got a bit more brave, and we were waiting at the bus stop and I saw him walking down the road. And I said to my friend, just like, don't look at him, make sure he just walks past. But he saw us and he walked up to the bus stop and he came like right up close to me and put his hand out to grab me, and he was giving me this like really horrible look. So I ran into the road, nearly got ran over. He ran after me, and then I got my phone out, and as soon as he saw my phone, he sort of like ran off down another road. But like ever since then, I've been an absolute nervous wreck with men in the street. I don't trust anyone.
Well, that's such a shame, that one incident, which, you know, is traumatic when it's happening, can affect 5 years of your life afterwards, at least. And how does that affect your relationships with men in general, like romantic relationships?
They really don't get it. It's like you need to be with somebody who's empathetic, because if they're not like really that understanding, they sort of get really impatient with it and quite irritated, and it makes you feel worse and it makes you more anxious. So like I had a relationship recently where it was kind of like that, and they used to get quite angry with me. I think that I was a bit weird, and it just sort of, it makes things really stressful, because it's hard to sort of get somebody to understand why 1 minute you're completely fine and the next minute you're panicking, or sometimes you can get really irritable from it as well. So like I seem like I'm not being very nice, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm so anxious.
So describe to me, if you're having, describe the feelings that you get on a day-to-day basis in terms of anxiety.
Travelling, like public transport, is a big one. Even this morning coming into uni, the bus was quite packed, and it just feels like when it's packed and you can't sit down and it's quite hot as well, it feels like you can't breathe. Like you're having like a mini panic attack, but it's like silence and nobody can tell you're having it, but you're trying to control your breaths. And it's little things like that. Like if I have a deadline, I find it hard to get work done because I feel like I need to start it, but I can't do it. And it's like pressure. Anything that's like pressure makes you too nervous to do something about it, I guess.
But, you know, I would say that that's kind of classic symptom that a lot of people might have. But from what you describe, this kind of colours your everyday life all the time. Is that correct? Or do you have times when you don't ever feel like this?
I don't think I ever don't feel anxious. I think it's just like wired into my brain. It's like sometimes it's really bad and sometimes it's just like the way that I think. So like with a normal person, you'd think realistically, if somebody doesn't answer their phone, that they're fine. They just are busy or haven't heard it or it's in another room. Whereas I will be like, instantly, I will get like a vision that something really bad has happened. So like sometimes I'll think, oh, they've fallen down the stairs or something like that. And I don't know why. Like,
but then you do write. I know you write.
Yeah.
So having a writing imagination fuels these kind of things, doesn't it? Because, and I write myself, so you have a dramatic imagination. That's how your brain works. And the other thing about being a writer is you have to put yourself in the situation in order to write it.
Yeah.
So if you've got that kind of brain fueled with anxiety, it can obviously make it worse, for sure.
Yeah.
So any other things that you think, like what are the actual feelings? I'd like to know, when you enter that space, what does it actually feel like?
I always compare it with losing a child in a supermarket and like the anxiety you feel when you can't find them, because that's like a constant when you're like having a panic attack. It can go on for like hours, or it can be for like until somebody reassures you that they're okay, and then it just instantly drops. So that's basically exactly what it feels like, I think.
So you're in fight or flight mode at all times then? You're on a kind of red alert situation.
Yeah.
That must be absolutely exhausting.
Yeah, it's horrible. That's why, like, in a relationship, it's really difficult, because it's hard for the person that you're with, but then it's harder for you. And it's, like, more exhausting for you, but they don't understand that.
So how are you going to find the type of person who can really understand that? If it's like when someone else is in pain, you're not feeling that pain, so how on earth can you can sympathise, but you can't really truly empathise properly because you don't really feel the pain, so therefore...
I think just as long as they're like understanding, because it is really difficult to deal with, but I've been doing like some therapy recently where it's really helped me calm down, but it is not always effective. Like sometimes I'm panicking and I can't do anything about it. Like I just have to wait until it dies down. But I want to educate people on it, which is why I'm doing this, because it's easier when people understand it from somebody's perspective that isn't their partner. Because when it's your partner, you make judgments and you assume that they're doing something to manipulate you or control you.
Yeah, or be possessive, which is what that could be read as, which is not, as you say, the actual case. You used a term earlier of normal people. So I thought that was interesting. So do you see yourself as not normal then?
I do to an extent. I just feel a bit weird about the way I think, because I know other people feel the same way. Like I was talking to my auntie about it because she has it as well. She doesn't have it like quite as bad as me, because like I have it linked with a little bit of depression as well, because it does cause that sometimes. But it makes you feel weird because a lot of people do things like socialise really often, like going out all the time. I like to go out, but I don't like to go out as often. I have to be in the mood for it. And it makes you feel like strange because people are always like being successful and things like that. And sometimes you feel like you can't take certain opportunities because you're too nervous about it.
But I suppose, is this fueled by social media because you think everybody else is taking those opportunities that you're not taking?
Probably, yeah. I think you compare yourself a lot when you see what somebody else is doing. It just makes you feel quite inadequate. Like, even recently I was looking at like somebody's Snapchat story and they work in like business and it's like really professional. And I'm like, how do they do that? Because I'm not like that. But then I'm like creative and I'm a different person, so I should consider that really.
You should. And I suppose the other thing is they're only putting up on social media their best self and the most successes that they're having. And so therefore you believe that everybody is having successful days at all time. But we all know, real people know, that actually that's not the reality for most people. And I think when you're younger, you probably don't realise that too much yet. Another thing you said, which I thought was interesting, you said, well, people are speaking to each other on the phone all the time. Now, the word speaking to me is a vocal thing with one person speaking, talking to another person. So your generation are now saying we're speaking to each other, but actually you're not. You're typing a message to each other. And and I don't know about you, when I'm writing an email or sending a text, I'm editing it. I'm making sure, how does that read? Will that be misinterpreted? Especially an email, especially if it's not someone I know very well or I don't know at all. That's not how we speak. We don't self-edit. At least someone like me doesn't too much. But in a way, that's we say things the way we want to say them. You know? Now, obviously, we hold back. We don't say everything we want to say. But in general, there is a spontaneity in what we're doing when we're communicating face-to-face or speaking in real terms to somebody. So there is quite a difference. Do you see that difference?
Yeah. I think that people misinterpret things that they say on text a lot, and it causes arguments on social media. This is like the most anxiety-inducing thing ever. Like having an argument with somebody over Messenger is so frustrating and so like nerve-wracking because you're waiting for a reply constantly. Yeah. Whereas if you're in person, you're sorting it and it just feels like you're letting everything out. But like even the email that I got back from you last night, it said thanks a lot with like an ellipses at the end, like ...
Oh yeah.
And I was like, is she angry at me or actually like thankful?
My goodness. I think the ... just sometimes I do that. I do that a lot in my writing actually, ... which is like, oh, thanks a lot and many other platitudes of thankfulness, it was absolutely not anything negative. I think that's really interesting. So that's your brain working overtime.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said you wanted to do this podcast because you're interested in sharing and educating with other people. And I think that's a really good reason for doing it, because you're being very brave in saying this. And I think more people need to explain how it actually feels. So how does the physical manifestation feel?
With me, because I think everyone's a little bit different. With me, it's like I get quite bad palpitations. I feel really breathless. I get shaky if it's really, really bad. Like things like people going to another country, like one of my family or something like that, makes me nervous. And sometimes it's to the extent where I physically shake and I can't sleep properly. That's really bad. But yeah. So it's usually like shaking, palpitations, like if like a car is about to hit you. Wow. It's that kind of feeling. It's like really shook up.
So you're constantly imagining the things that could happen.
Yeah.
And they're sometimes small things or sometimes huge things. Do they ever happen?
No.
There you go. So they don't actually happen. So you've wasted, you could say, all this energy on worrying about what could happen. So when bad things do happen, how do you react, or have you had any bad things happen?
It's a lot different to anxiety. So like anxiety would be like the anticipatory feeling. So like you constantly think something's going to happen. So it's always like nerves. It's like before going into an exam type of thing. But like, sorry, I forgot the question.
No, I mean, earlier when we were talking before we started recording the podcast, you said when your grandmother passed away. Tell me about that. The difference between something which is very upsetting if you lose a grandparent to the anticipation of something that might happen that does not occur.
So like when something actually does happen, you don't sort of register it properly. Well, personally, I don't. It's more like you feel like you should be more upset than you are, because all those times you've spent panicking and anxious were like quite extreme. And then when something actually happens, it feels so much less intense. Like it's still really sad and upsetting and like just is rubbish.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not that, like, it doesn't take all your energy away from you.
Because they're real kind of feelings that you have to respond to in the moment, as opposed to a futuristic anxiety about something that may never happen, which is, it's a totally different dynamic. So if you were going to advise any younger people or even people your own age how to get over this, what would you say? Or what would you advise not to do so that it escalates into a point that it's uncontrollable?
I think definitely spend less time on your phone, because since I've stopped speaking to people all the time, I feel so much more calm and so much better. And I've invested myself in my own hobbies. But also, if you feel really bad, you should go to your doctor and ask for CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy, where they teach you how to sort of reprogram your thoughts. So it doesn't stop it. It doesn't stop the initial, this is going to happen, but it does help you rethink it. So you get given these thought charts, which ask you what the situation is, and then your feelings in that situation to a certain percentage. And then you do a revised thought, which is the realistic, what is actually happening. And then you do the feelings again and you put the percentage again. So you see how your feelings have gone down. So that does actually help a lot. Writing your feelings down does help a lot.
Yeah, and as you are a writing person, that actually is probably a very good thing for you, because that's your natural go-to, isn't it? To get your thoughts out of your head and onto, paper or whatever way you do it. Thank you, Amy, because I think sharing this is really important, and I'm really glad that you were willing to do it.
Yeah. Thank you.